Hello and welcome to week 4 of our class. After today, you are halfway done, so yay! Let's go ahead and get started. In this section, we're going to look at some basic navigation and some very basic editing. First, what we need to talk about though is where's my cursor? When you're navigating text in any method, JAWS or NVDA will always announce the item that is physically located to the right of the cursor. If you look at the example on the right, it shows that there's a cursor to the left of the letter A in the word apple, and the word apple is located to the right of the cursor. So that's really important to know. If JAWS were to say the letter A or word apple, depending on how you are navigating, it's important to kind of keep an eye on that. As you navigate forward or backwards using the arrows, it's going to continue to say letters located to the right of the physical visible cursor. You might realize that this actually takes a lot of mobility or spatial awareness skills into account. You can also overthink this quite a bit. So it's not as hard as it sounds, and it will become automatic over time. Navigating text versus reading text. Yeah, there is a difference. When you're navigating text, you're actually moving the PC cursor as you read or as you move through the text, and you may edit as you navigate. When you're reading text, you're only moving the screen reader's cursor to read the text, as though you're reading it in a virtual mode. So it's things like text on a web page, or if you do a say all command in a document, that your cursor is not physically moving. Here's a pro tip. If you are in a Word document, you can use Insert Z to toggle browse mode on, which allows you to navigate large Word documents without making accidental edits. And this is particularly nice when you're just reading and you just want to navigate a large document like a user manual or some other large text that is marked as headings and things like that. So it is kind of nice. You can navigate by headings, links, bulleted list, anything like that. So it's kind of a nice idea, and it keeps you from accidentally editing the document. We're going to take a look at some key commands and key combinations. The first slide just looks at Windows key commands. The right and left arrow will move character by character. That's pretty obvious. Control and right arrow or left arrow will move word by word. And I say move because it is navigating. There is no voice because we're talking about Windows commands and we're not talking about how you do it with the screen reader, although those might be similar. The up and down arrow will move line by line, and control up or down arrow will move paragraph by paragraph. This is where we start talking about our screen reader. The right and left arrow in JAWS will move character by character, just like Windows. There are some other specific commands to the screen readers, such as number pad 5 will say the current character. You have to have your number lock off. Your screen reader will automatically turn your number lock off when it's turned on, when the screen reader itself is activated, I guess I should say. So you shouldn't really have to worry about that. What the real issue becomes is if you turn the screen reader off, you have to turn the number pad back on again with the num lock. Okay, so back to this. Number pad 5 twice quickly will say the current character phonetically. So things like whiskey, foxtrot, bravo, all of those, it will say the character phonetically. If you hit the number pad 5 3 times, it will say the ASCII value of the current character, and which is probably more than you ever needed to know. Control plus the right or left arrow or insert and the right or left arrow will move word by word. Insert and number pad 5 will say the current word, and insert number 5 on the number pad twice quickly will spell that word. And here I'm just going to stop for a minute to remind you, you see those insert keys. Remember, insert keys or the NVDA or the JAWS key, as we call them, the modifier keys, whatever that modifier key is, speaks directly to the screen reader. It's like remembering, hey, I'm using this key, I'm speaking to my screen reader. I don't really care what Windows does right now. I want to talk to my screen reader. Again, move line by line is just the up and down arrow. Insert plus up arrow is say the current line. Remember, insert equals speak into my screen reader. Alt plus up or down arrow will navigate or move sentence by sentence. Alt plus the number pad 5 will say the current sentence. This is one of those really odd times when then you're not actually using the insert key when you're talking about saying a sentence. But, you know, there's exceptions to every rule. Control plus up and down arrow move paragraph by paragraph. Control plus the number pad 5 will say the current paragraph and only the current paragraph. Insert plus home will say to the cursor. Read down to the position of your cursor and stop. Insert and page up will say from the cursor. Insert plus down arrow is the say all command. That means it'll read everything regardless of the location of your cursor. Now let's take a look at NVDA. Just as a heads up, some of these commands are similar or exactly the same as JAWS. Some of these commands are different. And I'm going to leave it up to you to determine how you differentiate the two. You could mark up something and kind of have like a little chart. Lots of different things you can do just to make sure that you separate those and understand the difference. But for the most part, they're pretty much the same, and if they're not, it's close enough. So the right and left arrow will move character by character as in all previous examples. The number 5 will say the current, number pad 5 will say the current character. Number pad 5 twice quickly will say the current character phonetically as before, and if you hit it 3 times, it will say the ASCII value of the current character. Again, more than you might need to know. Control plus right or left arrow go word by word. Insert plus numpad 5 will say the current word. Insert plus numpad 5 twice quickly will spell the current word. If you use an up or a down arrow, you will move line by line. If you use an insert plus the up arrow, NVDA will say the current line. Control plus up and down arrow will move paragraph by paragraph. I believe it's the same in JAWS. Control plus number pad 5 will say the current paragraph. Insert and down arrow will say all. Just a quick word about tables. Contrary to what some of us hear, tables are accessible, but what they are not is user-friendly. Each screen reader has its own table navigation commands. Non-uniform tables, such as tables that do not have the same number of rows and columns throughout, are much, much more challenging when you're talking about navigating it with a screen reader. Navigating tables that are uniform is not overly difficult, however, and creating tables with a screen reader is significantly more challenging than actually reading them. It's possible. I'm not saying it isn't, but it's just more challenging and might be more trouble than you want to put into it. All depends on your opinion. Moving within tables with both JAWS and NVDA. Alt, Control, and right arrow will move one cell to the right. Alt, Control, left arrow. What do you know? One cell to the left. Alt, Control, down arrow moves to the cell above. And Alt, Control, up arrow moves to the cell below. JAWS has some very specific commands for using tables, where NVDA does not have some of these very specific ones. For example, Alt Control plus right arrow will move you to the first cell. Alt Control plus End will move you to the last cell. Alt Control plus Shift plus up arrow will move you to the first cell in a column. and the same key combination, Alt Control Shift plus down arrow, will move you to the last cell in the column. Alt Control Shift and left arrow will move you to the first cell in the row, whereas Alt Control Shift right arrow will move you to the last cell. Alt Control plus number pad 5 will say the current cell. Insert plus Shift plus up arrow will read the current row. Insert plus Shift plus Home will read from the start of the row. Insert plus Shift plus Page Up will read to the end of the row. Insert plus Shift plus number pad 5 will read the current column. Insert Shift and will read from the start of the column. And Insert Shift plus Page Down will read to the end of the column. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? And that's because it is. Again, practice makes progress. Remember, where's my cursor? Knowing the location of your cursor is especially important when you're editing text. Practice makes progress. I've said this the whole time. It'll take some practice editing without looking at the screen. Turn the screen off. Put a towel over it. Be patient with yourself, and please be patient with your students. Chances are your kids will catch on faster than you did, you will, or you did, and that is actually pretty darn normal. Here's something to keep in mind when we talk about editing text. We need to know the difference between the backspace and the delete key. The backspace, based on where your cursor is, will erase the character located to the left of the cursor. So it will literally backspace on whatever you just wrote. Your screen reader will announce the item that was erased. The delete key, this is really important. The delete key erases the character located the other direction, so the right of the cursor. If you were to be moving, for lack of a better word, forward in your document, it will delete the next character forward. When erasing one character at a time, JAWS and NVDA will announce the letter that is now to the right of the cursor, not the letter you just erased. So when you're using the backspace, it announces the letter you just erased. But if you're using delete, it will announce the letter that is currently to the right of the cursor. When you're erasing larger chunks of text, and we're going to look at those in the next couple of slides, NVDA does not report what's erased or the next text in the string. So until you become accustomed to erasing in this way, it may not be wise to do that. You might want to double check to make sure that your text reflects the changes that you wanted to make versus the ones that actually happened. JAWS has two main methods to spell check. The first method is totally exclusive to JAWS. If you press Alt-Shift-L to open the Spelling Errors List dialog box, and remember, just in JAWS, you can navigate the list with your up and down arrows, and once you find the word that you want to correct, press the Enter key. JAWS will announce the misspelled word and say it letter by letter. The focus of your cursor is at the beginning of the word. Open the context menu with either a Shift plus F10 or with the application key on your keyboard, or you can use a simulated mouse click with the star on the number pad. Use the up and down arrows to navigate your choices. To hear them spelled, you can use the JAWS key or the Insert key plus number pad 5 twice quickly. If you press Enter on the correct option, or you could choose Ignore All or Add to Dictionary if the choices apply. This method is a little bit different because the newer versions of Office have the spell check in the navigation pane on the right-hand side of the screen, so it's not a dialog box anymore. So that makes a huge difference to how we need to interact with it. First of all, you need to make sure that you're focused on the top of the document and press F7 to locate the spell check function. The F7 is a Windows command. JAWS announces and spells the first misspelled word. Use your tab to navigate among the buttons or the shortcut keys that I've outlined on the next slide. It doesn't matter. Once you've located the suggestions list, you can use your up and down arrows to choose the word that you'd like to replace a misspelled word with. JAWS will spell the word that's in focus. And if you press JAWS and the numpad 5 twice quickly, it'll spell it. Select the appropriate word using the Enter key and it will be inserted in the document, replacing the incorrectly spelled word. The following are the key commands I talked about a few seconds ago when we were talking about the spell check pane. They are all Alt commands and they all are Windows commands. So you do not need to worry about using these with the screen reader running. You can have a screen reader not be running in the background and still use them. Alt-I will ignore a word one time. Alt-G will ignore all instances of the misspelling in the current document. Alt-A will add the misspelled word to the dictionary. Alt-C will change the misspelling to the suggestion that you have in focus. And Alt-L will change all instances of the misspelling in the suggestion that you have in focus. So let's talk a little bit about why you'd want to do any one of these. If you ignore a word one time, it might be just somebody's last name on the top of a paper. If you're brave, you can ignore all instances of the misspelling in a document. When I was first teaching some students, I used the word muggle as an example because at the time Harry Potter was really big and the word muggle was not in the dictionary. I'm afraid it is now, so I'm not really sure whether it's in the Microsoft dictionary or not, but we talked about how you might want to ignore all instances of a misspelling in a particular document if you're talking about muggles. However, if you are talking about muggles in a lot of your writing or are have a very unusually spelled last name, you can add that misspelling to the dictionary. It means it'll always ignore it. It won't mark it as wrong ever, ever, ever again until you move into the dictionary and change it. I think the Alt-C and Alt-L are pretty self-explanatory. NVDA, the spell checking is a little bit different when you're using the spell checking pane in newer versions of Word. So therefore, it's a little bit easier to navigate by the misspelled word. It's much more efficient than trying to move around that dialog box. Another thing you might notice that when you're typing and by default, NVDA will produce a buzzing sound when you have typed a misspelled word. It's kind of helpful if your student prefers to check the spelling as he or she writes. Follow the steps on the next slide to spell check within a document without opening the spell checking pane. First thing you're going to do is turn your browse mode on, which is your NVDA plus space, or your insert plus space, or your caps lock plus space. Type the letter W to navigate to the next misspelled word. Use your reading commands if you have to determine the context, because you need to make sure that you are going to be correcting it to the right word. Return focus to the misspelled word and press the application menu key, which is often on the third key from the right to the right of the space bar. Or you can use a Shift plus F10 as another way of right clicking, or you can use the right click simulation on the number pad. This is going to open your context menu. You can use your arrows to read the spelling suggestions, and if you'd like NVDA to spell one of the suggestions, just press NVDA plus tab twice. To select that word to replace the misspelling, press Enter. If you want to continue editing your document, you'll need to turn browse mode back off. So I know this was a huge chunk of information, and a lot of it was just me telling you what you needed to do, but this is where you get to do the work. Go in and practice it. Go in, turn on your screen reader, and use some of these commands and see what happens. And keep careful notes on what happens and try to experiment a little bit and get to know your screen reader commands and see if you can make it a little bit easier for yourself. I look forward to seeing you in class and kind of talking about the kinds of questions that you have.